Hey there tonight. We're stepping into a world where gods meddle like gossipy neighbors, and mortals make decisions so spectacularly bad they echo through 3,000 years. This isn't just another bedtime story about ancient heroes. This is the Trojan War, raw and unfiltered, where everyone's related to everyone else, and nobody learns from anybody's mistakes. So settle in, maybe adjust that pillow, and prepare to witness the most expensive temper tantrum in human history. Welcome to Bronze Age drama. Let's begin. You wake up in a world where the gods are real and petty as middle school students. The year is something around 1200 BCE, though nobody's keeping track because calendars are still a work in progress, and most people can't read anyway. You are standing on the shores of the Mediterranean, where the water is impossibly blue and the air smells like salt and burnt offerings. Behind you, the Bronze Age is humming along nicely. Cities with walls thick as houses, ships with painted eyes, warriors who polish their armor like it is jewelry. Everything feels solid, permanent, and unshakable. You have no idea you are about to watch it all burn down over a woman's face and wounded male pride. The gods live on Mount Olympus, which is both a real mountain and a supernatural realm that exists wherever they want it to exist. Logic isn't their strong suit. Zeus sits on his throne made of clouds and lightning, throwing thunderbolts when mortals annoy him, and seducing anything that moves when they don't. His wife Hera spends most of her time plotting revenge against his mistresses, their children, and occasionally random bystanders who happen to be in the wrong place. When she is having a particularly bad day, Aphrodite, goddess of love, treats human emotions like a game of chess played with living pieces. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, has opinions about everything and the power to enforce them. Ares, god of war, just wants to watch things burn. Apollo shoots plague arrows when he is bored. Artemis hunts anything that runs, and Poseidon shakes the earth whenever someone forgets to pour wine into the sea. Down here among the mortals, life moves to the rhythm of seasons and sacrifices. Kings rule from stone fortresses, queens weave and plot. Warriors train with bronze swords that gleam like captured sunlight. Farmers grow barley and olives. Shepherds watch flocks that dot hillsides like scattered clouds. Everyone knows their place. Everyone follows the rules. Everyone offers the proper sacrifices at the proper times, because the gods are watching, always watching, and they have long memories and short tempers. But underneath all this order, tensions simmer like oil over fire. Trade routes carry more than goods. They carry insults, promises, grudges, royal marriages, link kingdoms, but also create obligations that stretch across generations. Honor matters more than life. Reputation matters more than gold. And somewhere in the halls of Olympus, three goddesses are about to start an argument that will drown the Bronze Age in blood. You don't know it yet, but you are standing at the edge of the most famous war in human history. A war that will last 10 years. A war that will destroy the greatest city in the world. A war that starts with a wedding invitation and ends with everyone dead or wishing they were. The Trojan War. And it begins, as all the best disasters do, with someone not being invited to a party. So there you are, standing outside the most exclusive wedding of the Bronze Age. Peleus, a mortal king, is marrying Thetis, a sea goddess who can turn into water when she is annoyed. Every god and goddess has been invited. The guest list reads like a who is who of Olympus. Zeus brings thunder. Hera brings judgment. Apollo brings his lyre and expects everyone to listen to his poetry. The wine flows like rivers. The food appears on golden plates that never empty. Mortals serve immortals who pretend to be impressed by human hospitality, while secretly wondering why they bothered to show up. It is going exactly as planned until someone notices who is missing. Eris, goddess of discord and strife, wasn't invited. Not because someone forgot, because someone remembered exactly who she was and decided the wedding would be more pleasant without chaos incarnate bringing a +1. Eris stands at the gates, watching through the bars like a child pressed against a candy shop window. She is beautiful in the way that forest fires are beautiful, dangerous and mesmerizing, and absolutely guaranteed to ruin your day. Her dress shifts colors like oil on water. Her smile could cut glass. She holds something in her hand, small and golden and perfectly innocent looking. The guards won't let her in. They have their orders. No discord allowed, no chaos, no strife. Just happiness and harmony and all those other things that make immortals uncomfortable because they're so boring. You watch her toss the thing over the wall. It arcs through the air like a comet, catches the light, lands on the head table with a sound like destiny knocking. It is an apple golden, perfect, beautiful enough to make God stop talking, which never happens. The inscription around its surface reads, "For the fairest," in letters that seem to glow with their own light. 3 goddesses reach for it at exactly the same time. Hera, queen of the gods, who believes fairness is measured by power and position. Athena, goddess of wisdom, who knows fairness should be measured by merit and accomplishment. Aphrodite, goddess of love, who understands that fairness is obviously measured by beauty and the ability to make mortals do stupid things for your attention. They stare at each other across the table. The music stops. Conversations die. Even Zeus looks nervous, which should tell you something because Zeus once swallowed his first wife whole to prevent a prophecy and barely broke a sweat. But this is different. This is 3 goddesses who could level mountains arguing over who is prettiest, while holding the power to reshape reality according to their hurt feelings. The apple sits between them like a tiny golden bomb. Each goddess believes it belongs to her. Each goddess is absolutely certain she deserves it more than the others. Each goddess is prepared to prove her point in ways that will make everyone extremely sorry they attended this wedding. Eris watches from outside the gates, laughing like winter wind through dead leaves. Because sometimes the best revenge is simply giving people exactly what they think they want. Zeus stares at the golden apple like it might explode if he breathes on it wrong. 3 goddesses stare back at him, waiting for judgment, and you can practically hear him calculating how to get out of this without ending up as a cautionary tale. He is the king of the gods. He is supposed to have answers, but even he is not stupid enough to tell his wife, his daughter, and the goddess of love that 2 of them aren't as pretty as the 3rd. That is not leadership. That is suicide with extra steps. So he does what powerful men have been doing since the dawn of time when faced with an impossible choice. He delegates. He finds someone else to blame when it all goes wrong. His eyes settle on a young shepherd grazing sheep on Mount Ida outside the walls of Troy. The boy's name is Paris, though he doesn't know he is actually a prince. His parents, King Priam and Queen Hecuba of Troy, received a prophecy that their son would bring destruction to their city. So they did what any reasonable parents would do when faced with an inconvenient prophecy. They gave the baby to a shepherd and told everyone he died. The shepherd raised Paris as his own. And now the boy spends his days on mountainsides, playing his flute for sheep, who are better listeners than most humans. He is beautiful in that way that makes people stop and stare. Golden hair that catches sunlight. Eyes like summer storms. The kind of face that sculptors dream about and poets write embarrassing verses about. He is also about to become the most hated man in human history. But he doesn't know that yet. Zeus appears in a flash of thunder that makes the sheep scatter and Paris drop his flute. The 3 goddesses materialize beside him, each one radiating the kind of beauty that makes mortals forget their own names. Hera stands like a queen because she is one, wearing authority like jewelry. Athena's grey eyes hold the weight of all wisdom, and her armour gleams like captured starlight. Aphrodite smiles like she knows a secret that would make you blush, and roses bloom at her feet because even nature can't help showing off for her. Zeus explains the situation with the casual tone of someone asking directions. Pick the fairest, simple, easy. Definitely not a decision that will haunt him for the rest of his short life. Paris looks from goddess to goddess like a man trying to choose which cliff to jump off. They're all perfect. They're all terrifying. They're all staring at him with expressions that suggest his answer better be the right one. Hera steps forward first because queens don't wait for invitations. She offers him power beyond imagination. Kingdoms will bow to him. Armies will follow him. He'll rule from golden thrones and never want for anything. Athena speaks next, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. She offers wisdom and glory in battle. He'll be the greatest warrior who ever lived. Poets will sing his name for 1,000 years. His victories will echo through eternity. Aphrodite doesn't speak. She just smiles and lets her presence do the talking. The air around her smells like honey and spring rain. Her offer hangs unspoken in the space between heartbeats. The most beautiful woman in the world, love that will burn like wildfire, passion that will make gods jealous. Paris looks at the apple in his hands, golden and innocent and heavier than mountains. He makes his choice, and somewhere far away, fate starts sharpening its knives. Paris hands the apple to Aphrodite, and you can practically hear the sound of the world shifting on its axis. Hera's face goes white with fury that could freeze oceans. Athena's grey eyes turn cold as winter storms. They both look at Paris like they're memorizing his face for future vengeance, which they absolutely are. Gods have long memories and short tempers, and Paris just made enemies of two goddesses who specialize in making people sorry they were ever born. But Aphrodite smiles like sunrise and promises to deliver on her bargain. The most beautiful woman in the world will be his. All he has to do is go to Sparta and claim her. Simple. Easy. The fact that this woman is already married to someone else is just a minor detail. Goddess logic doesn't concern itself with mortal marriage laws. Helen sits in her palace in Sparta, probably wondering why everyone keeps staring at her like she is a natural disaster waiting to happen. She is beautiful, the way that breaks men's minds and starts wars. Not pretty, not lovely. Beautiful in a way that makes people forget how to breathe. Her hair is like spun gold. Her eyes change color depending on the light. Her smile could make philosophers question everything they thought they knew about truth and beauty and the meaning of existence. She is married to Menelaus, king of Sparta, who won her hand by being the last suitor standing in a contest that nearly caused a war by itself. Every prince in Greece wanted her. They lined up like contestants in a beauty pageant. Except the prize was Helen, and the losers went home with wounded pride and grudges that festered like infected wounds. Menelaus knows he is the luckiest man alive. He also knows that luck like his doesn't last forever. He watches Helen move through their palace like poetry in motion, and wonders what he did to deserve her. The answer is nothing, which is exactly the problem. Helen didn't choose him for love. She didn't choose him at all. Her father chose him because he seemed safe, stable, unlikely to cause international incidents or drag Greece into pointless wars. It seemed like such a good plan at the time. Marry Helen to a reasonable man. Live happily ever after. Raise children who don't inherit any world, ending beauty genes. Simple, easy. The kind of plan that fate loves to set on fire just to watch it burn. Paris arrives in Sparta like a golden fever dream. He is traveling as a guest, which means Menelaus has to show him hospitality, even though something about the boy makes his teeth itch. Paris is too beautiful, too charming, too interested in Helen for a casual visitor just passing through. But hospitality is sacred law. You don't turn away guests, even when they're obviously trouble wrapped in a pretty package. So Menelaus welcomes Paris into his home, feeds him at his table, offers him wine from his best cups, and watches helplessly as his wife falls under a spell that might be love, or might be divine intervention, or might be both. Helen looks at Paris and sees everything she has been missing. Adventure, passion. Romance that doesn't involve livestock management and tax collection. Paris looks at Helen and sees the face that will launch 1,000 ships, though he doesn't know it yet. He just knows that Aphrodite kept her promise, and the most beautiful woman in the world is staring at him like he hung the moon. They speak in whispers, they walk in gardens, they fall in love or lust or whatever you call it, when gods arrange your feelings for their own entertainment. And one night, while Menelaus sleeps, they disappear like morning mist, taking half the treasury with them because running away together is expensive. And Paris has expensive tastes. They sail for Troy, leaving behind an empty palace, and a husband who wakes up to find his wife gone, and his pride in ruins, and his honor demanding satisfaction that will drown the Bronze Age in blood. Menelaus wakes up to silence, which is the first sign something's wrong. Helen always hums in the mornings while she braids her hair. The sound drifts through the palace like music, and servants pause in their work just to listen. But today there is nothing, just the sound of wind through empty rooms and his own breathing getting faster, as he realizes the bed beside him is cold, not just empty cold. Like no one's been there for hours, he calls her name, and it echoes off marble walls that suddenly feel like a tomb. No answer. He checks their private chambers, the gardens, the courtyard where she likes to watch the sunrise paint the mountains pink and gold. Nothing, just Helen's perfume lingering in the air like a ghost that refuses to leave. The servants cluster in doorways, whispering behind their hands with the guilty expressions of people who know exactly what happened but wish they didn't. Their eyes won't meet his. They study the floor like it holds the secrets of the universe. Finally, Helen's favorite maid steps forward with tears streaming down her face and tells him what he already knows, but refuses to believe. Helen left in the night with the pretty young prince, with enough gold to buy a small kingdom, with the kind of finality that leaves no room for misunderstandings or second chances. The maid hands him a note written in Helen's careful script. It says she is sorry. It says she had no choice. It says love is stronger than duty, which is exactly the kind of thing people say when they're doing something unforgivable and want to feel noble about it. Menelaus reads the note 3 times, each reading making less sense than the last. Love is stronger than duty. What does that even mean? He loved her, he gave her everything. Servants to anticipate her every need. Freedom to do whatever made her happy, as long as it didn't involve running away with foreign princes. He was a good husband, patient, kind, boring maybe, but not cruel. Never cruel. He treated her like the treasure she was, and this is how she repays him, by disappearing in the night like a thief, except thieves usually have the courtesy to leave the wife behind and just take the gold. The rage hits him like a physical thing, not the clean anger of a wronged husband, but something deeper, older, the kind of fury that makes men do things they'll regret for the rest of their lives, assuming they live long enough for regret. His honor is in ruins. His pride is shattered. His wife is gone, and everyone in Greece will know why. They'll laugh behind his back. Poor Menelaus couldn't even keep his wife happy. Lost her to a boy who probably doesn't know which end of a sword to hold. The shame burns worse than the betrayal, which is saying something because the betrayal burns like acid in his veins. He looks at the note again, crumples it, throws it across the room. Then he picks it up and smooths it out because it is the last thing she touched, and even his rage isn't strong enough to destroy that connection completely. Love is stronger than duty. Maybe, but honor is stronger than love, and honor demands satisfaction. Honor demands war. Menelaus rides to Mycenae like a man possessed, which isn't far from the truth. Fury has settled into his bones like winter cold, and every mile between Sparta and his brother's palace feels like another insult to endure. The horse beneath him foams at the mouth from being pushed too hard, but Menelaus doesn't care. Nothing matters except reaching Agamemnon and convincing him that this isn't just a family embarrassment. This is a matter of Greek honor, a challenge that demands response. An insult that can only be answered with bronze and blood, and the kind of violence that makes enemies think twice before stealing Greek wives in the night. Agamemnon listens to his brother's story with the expression of a man calculating costs. He is king of Mycenae, overlord of half of Greece, and he didn't get there by making decisions based on wounded feelings. His palace rises from the hillside like a monument to power, its walls thick enough to stop armies, and high enough to remind visitors exactly who they're dealing with. Gold gleams everywhere, cups, plates, jewelry, weapons. Even the floor tiles are inlaid with precious metals because subtlety is for people who aren't sure of their place in the world. Agamemnon knows exactly where he stands, at the top, and he intends to stay there. The problem is that Helen's kidnapping isn't just Menelaus's problem. It is everyone's problem. Years ago, when Helen was still unmarried, and every prince in Greece was fighting for her hand, they made a pact, an oath, sworn before the gods and sealed with blood. All of Helen's suitors agreed to defend whoever married her, to come to his aid if anyone tried to steal his wife. It seemed like a good idea at the time, a way to prevent the kind of war that Helen's beauty was obviously going to cause eventually. Instead of fighting each other for her, they'd fight together for whoever won her. Simple, elegant. The kind of solution that looks brilliant right up until someone actually has to honor it. Now Agamemnon has to call in those oaths. He has to gather every king who ever wanted Helen and convince them to sail across the sea to get her back. Some will come willingly because honor matters more than inconvenience. Others will need persuading. A few will try to find creative ways to avoid their obligations, which is where Agamemnon's talent for threats and bribery comes in handy. He starts making lists, ships needed, men required, supplies to gather. It is the kind of logistical nightmare that makes lesser kings wake up in cold sweats. But Agamemnon has been planning for a war like this his entire life. Not this specific war, just the kind of war that lets a man prove he is worthy of the power he holds. Messages go out across Greece like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Come to Olympus. Bring your ships, bring your armies, bring your honor and your swords and your willingness to die for a woman. Most of you have never met, but all of you swore to protect. The greatest expedition in human history is about to begin. 1,000 ships will sail, 100,000 men will march. 2 civilizations will clash like titans, while the gods watch and place bets on who dies first. All because a pretty boy couldn't keep his hands to himself, and a beautiful woman thought love was more important than keeping her word. Agamemnon smiles as he seals the last message because he has always wondered what it would feel like to conquer the richest city in the world. Now he is about to find out. Achilles sits by the sea on the island of Scyros, watching waves roll against black rocks while trying to pretend he doesn't hear destiny calling his name. He is disguised as a girl, which sounds ridiculous, until you remember that he is the most beautiful young man in Greece and divine genetics. Don't care about traditional gender roles. His mother, Thetis, dressed him in women's clothes and hid him here because she knows something he doesn't want to think about. If he goes to Troy, he'll die there. Not maybe, not probably, definitely. The prophecy is clear as crystal and twice as sharp. He can live a long, peaceful life in obscurity, or he can have a short, glorious life that poets will sing about for 3,000 years. Most mothers would choose long and peaceful. Thetis isn't most mothers. She rises from the water like a nightmare wrapped in sea foam. Beautiful and terrible and absolutely certain, she knows what is best for everyone. Her hair drips with liquid starlight. Her eyes hold the depth of oceans and the coldness of underwater trenches where sunlight never reaches. She tells Achilles that Agamemnon's messengers are coming, that they'll find him soon. That hiding among the daughters of King Lycomedes was always meant to be temporary, just long enough for the war to start without him. But wars have their own momentum, and this one is pulling at him like a tide that can't be turned. She can keep him safe for a while longer, but eventually he'll have to choose. Safety or glory, life or legend. The kind of choice that defines a man's entire existence in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Achilles thinks about the prophecy while salt spray mists his face and seabirds cry overhead like souls of the unborn dead. Two paths stretch out before him. In one, he stays hidden, marries some nice girl, raises children who inherit his strength but not his rage, lives to see grandchildren and grey hair and the slow, gentle decay that comes to all mortals eventually. Dies in bed surrounded by family who mourn him for a season and then move on with their lives. In 50 years, no one remembers his name. In 100, it is like he never existed at all. The other path leads to Troy, to glory that burns like wildfire, to deeds that will echo through eternity, to death before his 30th birthday. Bloody and violent and absolutely meaningless to everyone, except the poets who will make him immortal with their songs. The messengers arrive like fate-wearing travelling clothes. Odysseus leads them because Odysseus is too clever for his own good, and definitely too clever for Achilles' good. He sees through the disguise immediately, probably because Achilles moves like a warrior even in a dress, and his hands are too calloused for a princess who is never held anything heavier than a mirror. Odysseus brings gifts, as if bribery might work, where prophecy failed, jewelry for the girls, weapons for the warriors. He spreads them out like a test, watching to see who reaches for what. The other girls cluster around necklaces and bracelets that catch the light like captured rainbows. Achilles tries to look interested in the jewelry, really tries. But his eyes keep drifting to the sword, to the spear, to the shield that gleams like a promise of violence. His fingers twitch toward the weapons like a drunk, reaching for wine, and Odysseus smiles because he has found what he came for. The greatest warrior in Greece, disguised as a girl, dreaming of war while trying to choose life. The irony is so perfect it hurts. Achilles throws off his dress like he is shedding his own skin, grabs the sword and becomes himself again in the space between one breath and the next. The transformation is so complete, it makes the watching girls step backward. Suddenly, aware they've been sharing meals and gossip with a weapon disguised as a person. Odysseus nods like a man whose calculations have just proven correct. And within days they're sailing for Olympus, where the greatest fleet in human history is supposed to gather, and then proceed to make Troy very sorry it ever existed. Except when they arrive, nothing is going according to plan. The ships sit in the harbour like sleeping giants, their painted eyes staring at nothing, while their crews grow restless, and their captains grow worried, and the wind refuses to blow in the right direction. Olympus is chaos wearing the mask of organization. 1,000 ships crowd the harbour, their masts creating a forest of wood and rope that blocks out half the sky. Men everywhere, more men than anyone has ever seen in one place. Greeks from every kingdom, every island, every city. State that ever swore an oath or owed a favour or wanted a share of Troy's legendary wealth. They sprawl across the beaches in camps that stretch beyond the horizon, cooking fires, sending smoke into a sky that never clears. The air smells like unwashed bodies and roasting meat and the kind of tension that builds before thunderstorms. Fights break out daily. Men drink too much wine and remember old grudges. Old grudges become new violence. Blood soaks into sand that is already seen too much of it. Agamemnon stands on the deck of his flagship, watching the wind vanes point stubbornly in the wrong direction, and tries not to look like a man whose grand plan is falling apart before it even begins. The wind has been blowing from the south for 3 weeks. Dead calm some days. Wrong direction the rest. Ships need wind to sail, and wind comes from the gods, and the gods are apparently not interested in helping Greece recover a stolen wife. Priests mutter about omens, captains mutter about going home, common soldiers just mutter. Which is never a good sign when you are trying to hold together the largest military expedition in human history, using nothing but shared purpose and mob psychology. The priests finally identify the problem, because priests always identify problems eventually, and the problems always require expensive solutions. Artemis, goddess of the hunt, is angry. Someone offended her. Someone always offends Artemis, because she is touchy about everything, and holds grudges like other people hold dinner parties. The priests can't agree on exactly what the offense was, but they're unanimous about the solution: sacrifice. Not just any sacrifice. The kind of sacrifice that makes gods sit up and pay attention. The kind that proves you are serious about earning divine favor. They suggest cattle first, because cattle are expensive but replaceable. Then horses, because horses are more expensive and harder to replace. The wind doesn't change, the ships don't move, and slowly, inevitably, the conversation turns toward the kind of sacrifice that no one wants to discuss, but everyone knows is coming, the kind that involves someone too precious to lose and too important to keep. Agamemnon listens to the priests explain what Artemis wants, and his face goes white as sails that will never fill with favorable wind unless he pays a price that will haunt him for the rest of his life. Iphigenia arrives at Aulis thinking she is coming to her own wedding, which shows you exactly how much Agamemnon cares about honesty when it conflicts with necessity. The message he sent to his wife was a masterpiece of creative truth-telling. Their daughter was needed at Aulis immediately. Achilles had fallen in love with her and wanted to marry her before the fleet sailed for Troy. It was romantic, it was urgent, it was completely false, but it got Iphigenia to the camp without the kind of screaming and pleading that would have made an already impossible situation even more unbearable. She travels with her mother, Clytemnestra, who spends the entire journey planning a wedding that will never happen, and talking about grandchildren she'll never hold, while Iphigenia dreams about marriage to the most famous warrior in Greece. The truth hits Clytemnestra the moment she sees Agamemnon's face. She has been married to him long enough to recognize the expression he wears when he is about to do something unforgivable and call it necessary. The muscle in his jaw twitches, his eyes won't meet hers. His hands shake just enough to notice if you are looking for it, and she is definitely looking. She finds him in his tent, staring at maps of Troy, like they hold answers to questions he is afraid to ask out loud. When she demands an explanation, he tells her everything. The wind, the angry goddess, the price Artemis demands for safe passage to Troy, their daughter's life in exchange for favorable winds. One girl's blood to launch 1,000 ships and start a war that will echo through eternity. Clytemnestra's reaction is immediate and volcanic. She doesn't scream, she doesn't cry. She goes cold in a way that makes the air around her feel like winter morning frost. Her voice drops to a whisper that cuts deeper than shouting ever could. She calls him a monster, a coward, a man so hungry for glory that he'll murder his own child to get it. She threatens to take Iphigenia and leave, to tell everyone what kind of father sacrifices his daughter for the chance to sack a foreign city, to make sure his name becomes synonymous with the kind of evil that makes people spit when they say it. Agamemnon listens without arguing because he knows she is right. He knows this makes him a monster, but he also knows that backing down now means losing everything. His authority, his honor, his chance to be remembered as the king who conquered Troy, instead of the king who let a woman's kidnapping go unpunished. Iphigenia doesn't understand what is happening until it is too late to run. The priests explain about divine will and necessary sacrifice, and the greater good while she looks from face to face, searching for someone who will tell her this is all a horrible mistake. But there is no mistake, just terrible clarity. Her father needs her to die so his ships can sail. Her death will buy wind and divine favor, and the kind of gesture that proves to angry goddesses that mortals take their displeasure seriously. She could fight. She could scream and kick and force them to drag her to the altar like a sacrificial animal. Instead, she walks head high, back straight. Every inch a princess, even as she approaches the knife that will end her life before it really begins. She tells her father she forgives him, which is either the most generous thing anyone has ever said or the cruelest, depending on how you feel about forgiveness for the unforgivable. Then she kneels before the altar, while the wind holds its breath, and waits to see if a father's love is stronger than a father's ambition. The answer arrives with the falling blade and the rising wind that finally mercifully blows from the north. The wind that cost Iphigenia her life carries the Greek fleet across wine-dark seas toward a city that exists more in legend than geography. 2 years of sailing, stopping, arguing about directions, and sailing some more while following coastlines that don't match any map, and asking directions from people who've never heard of Troy or claim it doesn't exist or helpfully point in 6 different directions at once. Some days the fleet sails north, other days south. Occasionally sail in circles while Agamemnon and his captains scream at each other about navigation and leadership, and whether anyone actually knows where they're going. The ships leak. The men get sick. Supplies run low. Morale goes lower. You start to wonder if Troy is even real, or if this entire expedition is chasing a city that exists only in stories told by bards who've never been farther from home than the next village. Then one morning you wake up to shouting that doesn't sound like the usual complaints about bad food and worse company. The shouting has excitement in it, wonder, fear, the kind of noise men make when they see something that changes everything they thought they knew about the world. You stumble out of your blankets and follow the crowd to the ship's rail, squinting against morning light that bounces off water like hammered silver. And there it is, Troy, rising from coastal plains like a god's fever dream, walls that stretch higher than mountains, towers that pierce the sky, gates that could swallow armies. The kind of city that makes you understand why poets run out of words trying to describe it. Troy doesn't look like the kind of place you conquer. It looks like the kind of place that conquers you. The walls are built from stones so massive it is hard to believe human hands moved them. They curve and rise and seem to go on forever, following the natural contours of the hill, but improving on them in ways that suggest the architects were either geniuses or giants or both. Towers punctuate the walls at regular intervals, each one tall enough to see the horizon and strong enough to hold siege engines that could probably sink ships from 3 miles away. The main gate is visible even from the ships, a mouth of bronze and iron flanked by statues of gods. who look distinctly unwelcoming to uninvited guests. Smoke rises from cooking fires inside the city, thousands of them, enough to feed a population larger than most entire kingdoms. The Greek fleet spreads across the horizon like a promise of violence, but from Troy's walls it probably looks more like an inconvenience than a threat. 1,000 ships sounds impressive until you see fortifications that have never been taken by force and probably never will be. The Trojans aren't panicking. They're not even particularly worried, judging by the way. People move along the walls with the casual confidence of citizens who know they're safe behind stones that have stood for centuries. They point at the ships and probably make jokes about Greeks who travel in groups because they're afraid to fight fair. They count the masts and do calculations that make them smile. Troy has survived sieges before. Troy will survive this one. Troy is eternal, unchanging, unbreakable. At least that is what they believe, standing on walls that touch the sky while Greek ships darken the water below, like storm clouds gathering for rain that will fall for 10 years and wash away everything they think they know about forever. King Priam stands on the highest tower of Troy, watching the Greek fleet spread across the horizon like a dark stain on blue water, and feels something he hasn't experienced in decades. Doubt. Not fear, exactly. Not yet. But the first cold whisper of uncertainty creeping up his spine like winter fog. 1,000 ships. He counts them himself because sometimes your eyes lie when they see something impossible. But the numbers don't change. Ship after ship after ship. Their bronze rams glinting in sunlight. Their painted eyes staring at his city with the patient hunger of predators who know their prey can't run. This isn't a raid. This isn't even a war. This is an invasion on a scale that makes the old songs about heroes and monsters seem quaint by comparison. The people of Troy gather on the walls like spectators at a festival, pointing and laughing and making the kind of jokes people make when they're not quite ready to take a threat seriously. Look at all those ships. The Greeks must have brought their entire civilization just to ask for one woman back. Someone suggests they should charge admission for the entertainment. Someone else wonders if the Greeks know how to fight or if they just know how to sail in impressive formations. The laughter has an edge to it, though, the kind of nervous energy that builds when people are trying to convince themselves they're not worried about something that is obviously worth worrying about. Children stare with wide eyes. Old men who remember previous sieges exchange glances that say more than words ever could. Paris stands beside his father, and you can see the exact moment when the full weight of what he has done finally settles on his shoulders like a cloak made of lead. He knew taking Helen would cause problems. He didn't know it would cause this. 1,000 ships carrying 100,000 men whose only purpose is to take Troy apart stone by stone until they find him and make him pay for stealing another man's wife. Helen appears beside him, beautiful as ever. But even beauty looks different when it is standing in the shadow of consequences that stretch to the horizon and beyond. She touches his arm and asks if he is having second thoughts. He wants to say no. He wants to be the kind of man who faces whatever comes without regret. Instead, he looks at the ships and tries to count how many men have come to kill him for love. The Trojan Council meets in emergency session. Old men arguing in circles about whether to give Helen back or dig in for siege, or try to negotiate some middle ground that satisfies everyone and saves face all around. Some voices call for reason, return the woman, and send the Greeks home. Others demand defiance. Troy doesn't bow to foreign threats, no matter how many ships they bring. A few suggest compromise. Keep Helen, but pay compensation. Gold instead of blood. Silver instead of war. But Priam listens to the arguments and knows they're all missing the point. This stopped being about Helen the moment Agamemnon saw Troy's walls, and realized what kind of prize was waiting behind them. The Greeks didn't come just for a woman. They came for the richest city in the world. Helen was never the destination. She was just the excuse. And excuses once made don't unmake themselves just because you are sorry you made them. The ships sit in the harbour like a promise of violence that no negotiation will satisfy and no surrender will prevent. Troy will fight because Troy has no choice. The only question is how long the walls will hold against men who have already sacrificed everything to be here. Hector stands in his private chambers, watching sunlight stream through windows that overlook a city about to go to war, while his wife Andromache holds their baby son and pretends she is not crying. The armor waits on its stand like a second skin made of bronze and leather, and the weight of expectations that come with being Troy's greatest defender. Each piece tells a story. The breastplate bears dents from a dozen battles. The helmet carries scratches that map every victory he has ever won. The sword has never failed him. The shield has never broken together. They make him look like something carved from marble by artists who understand that some men are born to stand between their people and destruction. Andromache knows what the armor means. Once he puts it on, he stops being her husband and becomes something else. Troy's champion, the man who carries the city's survival on his shoulders and makes it look easy even when it is crushing him. She has watched him transform before, watched the gentle man who makes their son laugh disappear inside bronze and emerge as someone harder, colder, more necessary than love. She begs him not to go. Not today, not yet. Let someone else lead the first charge. Let someone else draw first blood. Stay home and hold his son and pretend for one more day that walls are enough and heroes are optional. But Hector can't stay home because staying home isn't who he is. He is the eldest son of Priam, the heir to Troy's throne, the man every warrior in the... If he hides behind walls while Greeks storm the beaches, what message does that send? That Troy's prince is a coward, that the city's champion chooses safety over duty, that the walls protect him instead of him protecting the walls? He takes the armor piece by piece, each buckle and strap a ritual that transforms him from father to fighter. Andromache helps him dress for war because that is what wives do, even when every instinct screams at them to burn the armor and bar the doors and pretend the world outside doesn't exist. The baby reaches for his father's helmet, tiny fingers grasping at bronze that catches the light and throws it back like captured fire. Hector lifts the child, and for a moment his face softens into something almost peaceful. This is what he is fighting for. Not glory, not honor, not his father's pride or his city's reputation. Just this. A baby who trusts him to keep the darkness away. A wife who loves him, despite knowing that love won't be enough to bring him home alive. A normal life in a normal world where heroes are unnecessary, because no one needs protecting from anything worse than bad weather and poor harvests. But that world doesn't exist anymore. Maybe it never did. The Greeks are coming ashore in waves, bronze flashing in sunlight as they form ranks and advance toward walls that have never fallen but have never faced odds like these either. Hector kisses his wife, touches his son's cheek, and walks toward the door that leads to war. Andromache watches him go and knows she is seeing him alive for the last time, even if it takes years for the knowledge to prove itself true, because in war, heroes don't get to retire. They don't get to grow old and tell stories to grandchildren. They get to be remembered. And memory, however bright it burns, is still cold comfort when you are sleeping alone in a bed that used to hold two. 9 years pass like a fever dream of bronze and blood, and the kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones and never leaves. 9 years of Greeks camped on the beach, living in huts that smell like smoke and unwashed bodies, while they throw themselves against walls that refuse to break. 9 years of Trojans watching from those same walls, shooting arrows and dropping stones, and telling themselves that eventually the invaders will get tired and go home to their wives and farms and normal lives. 9 years of war that settles into routine like a job no one wants but everyone shows up for anyway. Because what else is there to do when you've invested this much time and blood in killing each other? The siege becomes a way of life. Greeks wake up, eat breakfast, try to storm the walls, get beaten back, eat lunch, try again, get beaten back again, eat dinner, drink wine, sing songs about the good old days when wars ended quickly and heroes died young instead of growing old and bitter in foreign fields. Trojans wake up, eat breakfast, watch Greeks approach the walls, kill as many as possible, eat lunch, watch more Greeks approach, kill more Greeks, eat dinner, drink wine, sing songs about ancestors who never had to endure this kind of grinding, pointless, endless violence that wears down souls faster than it wears down walls. Both sides try everything. Greeks build siege towers that the Trojans burn. Trojans sally out to attack the camps, but the Greeks are ready for them. Tunnels get dug and collapsed. Catapults get built and destroyed. Prisoners get taken and exchanged and taken again. Allies arrive to help both sides, fight bravely for a season or two, then go home because their own kingdoms need defending. And this war has clearly become the kind of permanent fixture that outlasts the people who started it. Young men become old men die and get replaced by their sons. The war continues because stopping would mean admitting that 9 years of death accomplished nothing except proving that some walls don't break no matter how hard you hit them. The boredom is worse than the fighting, at least when people are trying to kill you. There is excitement, purpose, the sharp clarity that comes with immediate danger. But most days, nothing happens. Guards stand on walls and stare at guards standing in camps, who stare back at guards standing on walls. Everyone's tired, everyone's homesick, everyone's sick of eating the same food, wearing the same armor, having the same conversations about weather and supplies, and whether anyone remembers why this whole thing started. Some Greeks desert and try to sail home, only to find their ships burned by captains, who know that letting men leave means watching the army dissolve one disappointed soldier at a time. Troy's gates stay closed, because opening them means letting the war inside. And inside is the only place that is still normal. Children grow up thinking walls are natural features of the landscape. Old people die having never seen the world beyond the siege. Markets function, people fall in love, get married, have babies who learn to sleep through the sound of bronze on bronze and shouting in languages they don't recognize. Life continues because life always continues, even when it is surrounded by men whose only job is ending it. The war becomes background noise, deadly, persistent, but no more remarkable than rain or wind or any other natural disaster that goes on too long, and becomes part of the weather you learn to live with whether you like it or not. 9 years of siege warfare has a way of wearing down everything except wounded pride, which only seems to grow stronger with time, like wine aging in a cellar full of resentment. Achilles sits in his tent, polishing armor that hasn't seen real action in weeks, while outside the sounds of another pointless skirmish drift across the beach like distant thunder. He is the greatest warrior who ever lived, and he is bored out of his mind. Not bored enough to go home, because that would mean admitting the whole expedition was a waste of time, but bored enough to start picking fights with people who definitely don't deserve to be on the receiving end of his attention when he is looking for an excuse to hurt someone. The fight starts over Briseis, which is typical because everything important in this war seems to revolve around women who had no say in any of the decisions that got them here. She is Achilles' prize, taken during a raid on a Trojan ally, beautiful and clever, and probably wishing she'd never been born beautiful. Or clever, because both qualities make her valuable to men who collect people like other people collect pottery. Achilles actually cares about her, which makes the situation more complicated than the usual casual cruelty that passes for romance in wartime. She is not just a trophy, she has become something approaching a companion. Someone who listens when he talks about his mother's prophecies and doesn't look at him like he is a weapon that happens to be shaped like a person. Agamemnon has his own prize. Chrysalla happens to be a priest of Apollo. This turns out to be relevant when the priest shows up at the Greek camp with ransom money and divine backup. Demanding his daughter's return in terms that make it clear refusal isn't really an option unless you enjoy plague and divine wrath as seasoning for your morning bread. Apollo starts shooting plague arrows into the camp. Men start dying faster than they can be replaced. And suddenly Agamemnon finds himself in the awkward position of having to give up his prize or watch his entire army die of supernatural disease. He chooses the smart option, which is why he is still alive after 9 years of war. But he doesn't choose the gracious option. Instead of accepting the loss with dignity, Agamemnon decides that if he has to give up his prize, someone else should suffer too. Fair is fair, after all. Shared misery is the foundation of military leadership. He takes Briseis from Achilles with the casual entitlement of a king who has forgotten that some people are too dangerous to humiliate without consequences. Achilles watches his prize, his companion, his one piece of normal human connection being dragged away by soldiers who won't meet his eyes, and something inside him breaks. Not his heart, exactly. Something deeper. Something that connects him to the war effort and the Greek cause, and any reason to keep fighting for people who treat him like a convenient tool instead of a human being with feelings that matter. The argument that follows is the kind that gets remembered in songs, mostly because it involves two men with legendary tempers screaming at each other, while an entire army watches and takes mental notes for future gossip sessions. Achilles calls Agamemnon a coward who hides behind other men's courage. Agamemnon calls Achilles an arrogant child who thinks his pretty face makes him special. Both accusations hit close enough to home to draw real blood. The fight escalates until Achilles reaches for his sword and Athena herself has to intervene. Grabbing his hand and whispering that killing Agamemnon right now would feel satisfying but solve nothing. Achilles listens because gods tend to have good advice about not doing stupid things that feel right in the moment. But he makes a promise that will haunt everyone. He is done fighting for Greeks who don't appreciate him, done bleeding for kings who treat him like hired help, done being the weapon that wins their war while they take credit and prizes. From now on, Agamemnon can fight his own battles and see how well that works out for everyone. Achilles walks away from the argument like a man shedding his skin, leaving behind 9 years of loyalty and shared purpose and everything that connected him to the Greek cause. His tent sits apart from the others, which used to seem like an honor befitting the army's greatest warrior, but now feels like the isolation it always was. He is not Greek, exactly. He is Myrmidon, which means his allegiance was always personal rather than patriotic. He came to Troy for Agamemnon, not for Greece. He stayed for glory, not for Helen. And now that Agamemnon has made it clear what he really thinks of the man who has been keeping this expedition alive for 9 years, Achilles sees no reason to pretend loyalty to people who mistake him for a convenient tool that happens to bleed when you cut it. The Myrmidons follow their prince into self-imposed exile, because that is what good soldiers do when their commander makes a decision that is probably stupid but definitely final. They set up camp within the camp, close enough to watch the war but far enough away to make it clear they're spectators now. not participants. Achilles' ships get hauled up on the beach and covered like they're settling in for a long stay. His armor gets stored away. His weapons get cleaned and oiled and put somewhere safe. The greatest warrior in the world officially retires from active duty and spends his days sitting by the sea, playing his lyre and singing songs that sound like prophecies wrapped in melody. The change in the war's rhythm is immediate and catastrophic. Achilles wasn't just a fighter. He was the thing that made Greeks believe they could actually win. Without him, every skirmish becomes a question mark. Every battle plan includes calculations about how many more men will die because the one man who could guarantee victory is painting his nails and composing poetry instead of killing Trojans. Morale drops like a stone into deep water. Soldiers who used to charge walls with confidence now approach them like men walking to their own funerals, which isn't entirely inaccurate, Patroclus. Achilles' closest friend, and the one person who might be able to talk sense into him, tries everything short of divine intervention to change his mind. He points out that Greeks are dying, that the war is turning. That honor doesn't require destroying your own side to prove a point. Achilles listens with the patient expression of someone who has already thought through every argument and found them all insufficient. He is not being petulant. He is not throwing a tantrum. He is making a calculated decision about what his loyalty is worth and who deserves it. Agamemnon wanted to remind him that kings take what they want from their subordinates. Fine. Now he gets to learn what happens when subordinates stop subordinating. The tent becomes a strange kind of court where visitors come to plead with the man who holds the war's fate in his hands and refuses to open them. Odysseus tries cleverness. Ajax tries straightforward appeals to friendship. Old Nestor tries wisdom wrapped in stories about better days when heroes understood their obligations. Achilles receives them all with courtesy that is somehow more insulting than anger would be. He offers wine. He listens politely. He sends them away with nothing except the growing certainty that the greatest warrior who ever lived has decided he'd rather watch Troy win than help Greece succeed. Outside his tent, the war grinds on without him, and every day it becomes clearer that some problems can't be solved by anyone except the one person who has decided he is done solving other people's problems forever. The Trojans notice Achilles' absence, the way you notice when a thunderstorm moves on and leaves behind clear skies and the possibility of actually getting things done. Hector stands on Troy's walls, watching Greek formations that suddenly look smaller, less confident, less like an unstoppable force, and more like an army that has lost its most important piece. For 9 years, every Trojan battle plan started with the question of how to avoid Achilles, or at least minimize the damage he could do before someone managed to kill him or drive him back to his ships. Now that question has been answered by divine intervention in the form of Greek stupidity and wounded pride. The greatest weapon in the enemy arsenal has removed itself from play, and opportunity knocks with the sound of bronze on bronze. The first Trojan sortie in months catches the Greeks completely off guard. Not because they've forgotten how to fight, but because they've forgotten how to fight without the safety net of knowing Achilles will charge in to save them if things go badly. The gates of Troy swing open like the mouth of some great beast, and Hector leads his warriors out in a wave of bronze and horsehair plumes that crashes into Greek lines like a tide that has been held back too long, and finally finds its outlet. The battle isn't even close. Greeks who used to stand firm break and run. Greek captains who used to plan aggressive assaults suddenly find themselves trying to figure out how to retreat without turning it into a complete rout. Hector fights like a man who has suddenly remembered what winning feels like. His spear finds gaps in armor that seem to open just for him. His sword cuts through shields like they're made of paper instead of bronze and leather. Men fall back before him not just because he is dangerous, but because he is confident in a way that makes danger seem inevitable. For 9 years he has been fighting defensively, trying to protect his city from enemies who seem to have all the advantages. Now he is fighting to win, and the difference shows in every movement, every decision, every perfectly timed strike that drops another Greek into sand, that drinks blood like a thirsty drunk drinks wine. The Greeks fall back to their ships, and for the first time since this war started, the possibility of complete defeat hangs in the air like smoke from burning houses. Some captains talk about cutting their losses and sailing home while they still have ships to sail and men to crew them. Others argue for one last desperate assault, throwing everything they have left at Troy's walls in the hope that sheer desperation might accomplish what 9 years of planning couldn't. But mostly they just stare across the plain at walls that suddenly seem higher, stronger, more permanent than ever, while Trojan campfires multiply like stars coming out after sunset. Achilles watches the disaster unfold from his tent with the detached interest of someone reading about distant wars in letters from home. Patroclus brings him reports that get worse with each telling. Greeks dead, Greeks wounded, Greeks running like rabbits with hounds on their trail. Achilles nods and asks for more wine, as if the collapse of everything he spent 9 years building is just another piece of mildly interesting news. When Patroclus finally explodes and demands to know how he can sit there doing nothing while their friends die, Achilles looks at him with eyes that hold no warmth at all and says this is exactly what Agamemnon wanted. A war without Achilles. Now he is getting one. The fact that it is going badly is neither surprising nor his problem. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way, and this is Agamemnon's chance to discover what leadership looks like when you can't hide behind someone else's competence. Patroclus stands outside Achilles' tent, watching Greek ships burn on the beach, while the man who could stop it all sits inside playing melancholy songs on his lyre, like the world's most dangerous bard. The Trojans have pushed the Greeks back to their ships, which wasn't supposed to be possible, but apparently no one told Hector that. Flames lick at masts and sails while men scream and die and run in circles trying to save equipment that is already lost. The smell of burning wood mixes with the smell of burning flesh, and even the sea wind can't blow away the stench of 9 years of ambition going up in smoke. The plan that forms in Patroclus's mind is the kind that sounds brilliant until you think about it for more than 30 seconds. If Achilles won't fight, maybe someone else can pretend to be Achilles. The armor is distinctive enough that from a distance, in the confusion of battle, Trojans might mistake Patroclus for the real thing. Fear of Achilles has kept them penned up behind their walls for 9 years. Maybe fear of someone wearing Achilles' armor will be enough to turn the tide one more time. It is not a perfect plan. It is not even a good plan. But it is the only plan that doesn't involve watching the entire Greek expedition burn, while the greatest warrior in the world composes poetry about the futility of human ambition. Achilles listens to the proposal with the expression of someone being asked to loan out his favorite sword to a child who wants to play warrior. The armor isn't just bronze and leather. It is a symbol, a promise, a threat wrapped in metal that has been beaten into shapes that speak to every eye that sees them. When men see that armor, they don't see whoever happens to be wearing it. They see death walking among them with purpose and precision, and the absolute certainty that resistance is futile. Letting Patroclus wear it is like handing over his identity along with his weapons, and identity isn't something you loan out lightly when it is the only thing standing between you and being forgotten entirely. But the ships are burning, and Patroclus is the closest thing to a brother Achilles has ever had, and sometimes friendship demands compromises that logic screams against. Achilles helps him into the armor piece by piece, each buckle and strap a ritual that transforms his gentle friend into something that looks like a weapon designed by gods who understand that sometimes mercy requires violence. The helmet settles over Patroclus's head like a crown made of bronze and bad decisions. The spear feels heavy in his hands. Not because it weighs too much, but because it carries the weight of expectations that no mortal should have to bear. The transformation is immediate and terrible. Patroclus stops being himself and becomes a mirror reflecting everyone's fear of the man whose armor he wears. Greeks cheer and rally because Achilles has finally returned to save them. Trojans fall back because the nightmare they've been dreading for 9 years has finally materialized on the battlefield. But Patroclus isn't Achilles, no matter how much he looks like him from a distance. He has the armor but not the skill, the reputation but not the ruthlessness, the appearance of invincibility but not the reality. And in war, appearance is never enough when reality comes calling with bronze in its hands and murder in its heart. Achilles watches his best friend march toward glory wearing his face, and knows with the cold certainty of prophecy that he has just sent the person he loves most in the world to die wearing his name. The messenger arrives at Achilles' tent, running like all the hounds of hell are chasing him. Which isn't far from the truth, because the news he carries is the kind that turns rational men into forces of nature. He can barely speak through exhaustion and terror, words tumbling over each other like stones down a hillside. Patroclus is dead, cut down by Hector while wearing Achilles' armor, stripped of that same armor while Greek forces fled in disorder, leaving their hero's body to be dragged behind Trojan chariots like a trophy of war. The plan worked perfectly right up until the moment it killed the only person Achilles actually cared about more than his own reputation. Achilles doesn't speak, doesn't move, doesn't even seem to breathe. He sits like a statue carved from marble that has been painted to look like a living man, except his eyes have gone completely dead in a way that makes the messenger take 3 steps backward and seriously consider running for his life. When the grief finally hits, it is not the clean sorrow of a man mourning his friend. It is something older and hungrier, the kind of rage that builds in the spaces between heartbeats and then explodes outward like a volcano that has been dormant too long. The sound that comes from his throat isn't quite human. It is the noise a wounded animal makes when it is decided that if it has to die, it is taking everything else with it. The rage that follows is systematic and terrible. Achilles tears his clothes, pulls his hair, throws himself on the ground like a man trying to dig his way to the underworld with his bare hands. But this isn't the theatrical grief of a hero performing for an audience. This is something private and raw. The sound of a soul breaking in places that can be repaired. Thetis rises from the sea like a concerned mother who has felt her child's pain across impossible distances. She finds him covered in dirt and blood from where he is clawed at himself, keening like a man who has lost everything that made life worth living. When she tries to comfort him, he looks at her with eyes that hold no comfort, no peace, no anything except the kind of emptiness that comes before violence. He tells her about Patroclus, about the armor, about how his pride killed the only person who ever looked at him and saw something worth loving instead of something worth fearing. He says he is going to kill Hector, and the way he says it makes it sound less like a threat and more like a law of nature that has already been written in bronze and blood. Thetis reminds him about the prophecy. If he kills Hector, he dies soon after. Paris will find his heel. Apollo will guide the arrow. His choice is simple. Live a long life in exile, or die young after making sure Hector pays for what he has done. Achilles doesn't hesitate. doesn't consider alternatives, doesn't negotiate with fate or try to find loopholes in prophecy. He just states his intention with the flat certainty of a man who is already dead inside and is now working on making the outside match. He'll kill Hector. He'll probably kill every Trojan he can find along the way. He'll turn the plain in front of Troy into a slaughter ground that poets will describe in whispers for the next 1,000 years. And when it is over, when Hector is dead, and his own death comes looking for him, at least Patroclus won't be alone in the dark. Sometimes friendship means following someone into places you can't come back from, and Achilles has never been afraid of the dark. He just needs new armor first, because you can't go to war wearing grief and good intentions. You need bronze and fury, and the kind of divine weapons that turn mortal men into forces of nature that gods themselves hesitate to fight. Thetis descends into the workshop of Hephaestus, like grief wearing a sea goddess costume, and even the god of the forge stops hammering when he sees her face. Hephaestus knows that look, it is the expression mothers wear when their children are about to do something that will get them killed, and no amount of wisdom or pleading will change their minds. She doesn't have to explain what she needs. The story is written in her tears, in the way she holds herself like someone carrying a weight that would crush mountains. Her son needs armor, not just any armor. The kind that transforms men into legends and legends into forces of nature that reshape the world through violence. Hephaestus works through the night like a man possessed, which isn't entirely inaccurate, because he is possessed by the knowledge that what he is creating will be worn by the greatest warrior who ever lived for exactly long enough to kill the second greatest warrior who ever lived before dying himself. The armor takes shape under his hammer-like poetry written in bronze and silver and metals that don't have names because they only exist when gods need to make something that exceeds the normal limits of what is possible. Each piece is a masterwork that would take mortal smiths' lifetimes to create, assuming they had divine fire and immortal patience and hands that understand metal the way sculptors understand marble. The shield is the centerpiece, a cosmos in miniature that shows the entire world in concentric circles of beaten gold and silver. Cities at peace and cities at war. Farmers harvesting grain under peaceful skies. Warriors storming walls under angry gods. Wedding feasts and funeral pyres. Lions hunting deer. Dolphins playing in wine-dark seas, the whole sweep of mortal existence, hammered into metal that catches light and throws it back like captured dreams. It is beautiful enough to make kings weep and strong enough to stop any weapon ever forged. When Hephaestus holds it up to catch the forge light, even he pauses to admire what divine inspiration and supernatural skill can accomplish when they're motivated by grief and the certainty that beauty is always temporary. Thetis carries the armor to her son like she is carrying his funeral shroud, which isn't entirely wrong because the armor is designed to make him invincible right up until the moment it doesn't. Achilles receives it with the reverence of a priest handling sacred relics, each piece sliding into place like it was made for his body specifically, which it was. The breastplate fits like a second skin. The greaves wrap around his legs like they grew there. The helmet settles over his head like a crown made of bronze and destiny. When he lifts the shield, the weight distributes perfectly across his arm, and the spear balances in his hand, like it has been waiting its entire existence for this moment. The transformation is immediate and terrifying. Yesterday, Achilles was a grieving man consumed by rage and loss. Today, he is something else entirely. Death wearing bronze armor and carrying divine weapons. War made manifest in human form. The kind of force that makes gods step carefully and mortals pray to whoever's listening that they're not standing between him and his target. He tests the spear's balance, checks the shield's grip, adjusts the helmet's fit. And with each small movement he becomes less human and more like a natural disaster that has learned how to walk upright and carry weapons. When he is finished, he looks at his mother with eyes that hold no warmth, no love, no anything, except the cold fire of someone who has decided that if the world wants a monster, he'll give it one that exceeds every nightmare it has ever had. Tomorrow, he goes back to war. Tonight, Troy should say its prayers, because tomorrow the gods themselves will have to decide whether justice or mercy matters more, when the greatest warrior who ever lived comes looking for revenge. Dawn breaks over Troy like a reluctant witness to what is about to happen, and even the sun seems hesitant to illuminate a day that is going to end with so much blood that poets will struggle to find words that don't sound like they're exaggerating. Achilles stands at the edge of the Greek camp, wearing armor that makes him look like a god who is decided to cosplay as a warrior. And when he raises his voice to call the army to battle, the sound carries across the plain like thunder that he's learned how to speak Greek. Men who've been fighting for 9 years without him suddenly remember why they used to think this war was winnable. The Greeks form up behind him like they're following death itself into battle, which isn't far from the truth, because Achilles has moved beyond normal human categories into something that makes philosophers question their assumptions about the difference between heroes and natural disasters. His spear catches morning light and throws it back like captured lightning. His shield reflects the sky in ways that hurt to look at directly. When he starts walking toward Troy's walls, every step sounds like a judge's gavel falling on a verdict that has been delayed too long, but finally arrived with interest compounded over 9 years of waiting. The Trojans see him coming and know immediately that the war just changed in ways that no amount of walls or courage or divine favor will be able to address. This isn't the Achilles who fought for honor and glory and the chance to be remembered in songs. This is something else entirely. Grief wearing bronze armor, rage carrying divine weapons. Love transformed into the kind of violence that makes mountains step aside and rivers change course just to avoid being in the way when it arrives at its destination. Hector watches from the walls and knows with the cold certainty of prophecy that his death is walking across the plain wearing his friend's face. The battle that follows isn't really a battle. It is a demonstration of what happens when someone who was already the most dangerous man alive decides he has nothing left to lose except his life. And life stopped mattering the moment. Patroclus died wearing his armor. Achilles cuts through Trojan ranks like they're made of morning mist instead of bronze and muscle and bone. His spear finds targets that seem to appear just for him. His sword opens gaps in reality that fill with enemy blood. Men fall away from him in waves, not because they're cowards, but because staying near him is like trying to fight a wildfire with bare hands. But he is not fighting the army. He is fighting his way toward one man, and everyone else is just an obstacle between him and the person who killed his friend. When Trojans try to stand in his way, he goes through them. When they try to surround him, he kills them faster than they can close the circle. When they run, he lets them go because running isn't his problem. His problem is finding Hector and making sure that death comes to the man who dared to kill Patroclus while wearing Achilles' name. The chase that is about to begin will circle Troy's walls 3 times and end with the kind of violence that makes gods look away and mortals remember why some stories are better told than lived. But first he has to find his target, and Troy is a big city with a lot of places for heroes to hide when death comes looking for them wearing divine armor and carrying weapons forged by gods who understand that some revenge requires tools that exceed normal human limitations. Hector sees Achilles coming across the battlefield like a bronze storm with murder on its mind, and every instinct he has developed in 20 years of warfare screams at him to run. Not because he is a coward, because he is not stupid. This isn't the Achilles who fought with honor and respected worthy opponents and sometimes showed mercy to men who deserved it. This is something else wearing Achilles' face. Something that is moved beyond normal human emotions into territory, where mercy is a foreign concept, and honor is whatever serves the cause of making Patroclus's killer suffer for what he has done. When a force of nature comes looking for you specifically, running isn't cowardice. It is basic survival instinct dressed up as tactical thinking. The chase begins at Troy's main gate and immediately becomes the kind of spectacle that will be talked about for the next 3,000 years, assuming anyone survives to do the talking. Hector runs along the base of the walls, while Achilles follows at a distance that never changes, never decreases, never increases. Not because Achilles can't catch him, because Achilles doesn't want to catch him yet. He wants Hector to understand exactly what is happening, that he is being hunted, that the hunt will end when Achilles decides it ends, that every step he takes is just another moment of borrowed time before the inevitable collision that will settle all debts in blood and bronze. King Priam watches from the walls with the expression of a man who is seeing his son die in slow motion, and can't do anything except bear witness to the cruelty of gods who arrange these things for their own entertainment. Queen Hecuba stands beside him, her hands gripping the stone so tightly her knuckles have gone white, watching her eldest son run for his life around walls that were supposed to keep death outside, but apparently can't keep it from following you home when you've killed someone that death loved more than its own existence. They call out to him, begging him to come inside, to let the gates protect him, to choose survival over whatever honor demands in situations like this. But Hector can't stop running, and he can't come inside because coming inside means bringing Achilles with him. And Achilles inside Troy's walls would be like a fire inside a granary full of everything you need to survive the winter. Some fights you take to protect the people behind you. Others you take to protect them from what happens if you refuse to take them. This is the second kind. Hector runs because running keeps Achilles outside the walls, focused on him, instead of on the city full of people who never killed anyone's best friend, and don't deserve to pay for what he did in the heat of battle, when victory seemed possible and consequences seemed distant. 3 times around the walls they go, hunter and hunted, while gods place bets and mortals pray, and the sun moves across the sky like time itself, is reluctant to let this moment end because what comes next will change everything about how wars are fought and heroes are remembered. Hector's legs burn. His lungs scream for air. His armor feels heavier with each step, but still he runs because stopping means dying, and dying means leaving Troy without its greatest defender. When Achilles is still alive and angry and carrying weapons that could probably knock down walls if he put his mind to it. Behind him, Achilles follows with the patient persistence of someone who knows that every chase ends eventually. And when this one ends, the longest friendship in the Greek camp will be avenged with the kind of violence that makes the gods themselves wonder if they've created something too dangerous to let live. On the 4th circuit around Troy's walls, something changes in the rhythm of the chase, and Hector knows with the cold certainty of mathematics that his strength is running out faster than Achilles' patience. His legs feel like water. His breath comes in gasps that taste like copper and exhaustion. Behind him, Achilles maintains the same steady pace he has held for the last hour. Armor gleaming in afternoon light, divine weapons ready for the work they were made to do. The chase has become a countdown, and everyone watching knows they're witnessing the final moments before impact. Even the gods stop talking and lean forward to see how this ends, though they probably already know because gods always know and just pretend surprise to make the entertainment last longer. Hector stops running. Not because he wants to, because his body makes the decision for him. Muscles seizing up, like they're refusing to participate in what comes next. He turns to face Achilles with the dignity of a man who has run out of alternatives, but not out of courage, straightening his shoulders and raising his spear like the last gesture of defiance. Still matters when you are about to fight someone who has been personally armed by gods who specialize in making sure their favorites win. For a moment, they just look at each other across 20 feet of ground that might as well be the distance between life and death. Two men who represent everything their respective sides believe about honor and courage and what makes someone worth following into impossible situations. The fight that follows is brutally one-sided, which shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone who has been paying attention to what Achilles has become since Patroclus died. Hector is good, Troy's champion, the kind of warrior who makes other warriors look like children playing with toy swords. But Achilles isn't just good anymore. He is something else entirely. Grief transformed into violence, love converted into the kind of rage that burns through bronze like it is paper, and through bone like it is kindling. His spear moves faster than human eyes can follow. His shield turns aside attacks that should have killed him. When Hector's best strike bounces off divine armor like a pebble off a mountain, they both know how this ends. The death, when it comes, is exactly as brutal as you'd expect from someone who is moved beyond normal human emotions into territory, where mercy is a luxury he can't afford, and honor is whatever serves the memory of his dead friend. Achilles' spear finds the one gap in Hector's armor where throat meets helmet, and the bronze point goes through flesh and bone, like they were put there specifically to be pierced by divine weapons, wielded by men who've forgotten how to think about anything except making their enemies pay for what they've done. Hector falls like a tower that is held up the sky. For so long, everyone forgot it could ever come down. But death isn't enough for Achilles. Nothing will ever be enough until Patroclus comes back, which isn't going to happen no matter how many Trojans he kills or how creatively he kills them. So he does something that crosses the line between justice and atrocity, between revenge and the kind of violence that makes gods themselves look away in disgust. He ties Hector's body to his chariot and drags it back toward the Greek camp, while Troy watches from the walls and learns what it looks like when heroes stop being human and become forces of nature that don't care about anything except making sure their grief has company in whatever dark place grief goes to die. The war has just changed again, and this time the change feels permanent in ways that make everyone involved wish they'd never heard of Helen or honor or any of the pretty words people use to justify the ugliness that follows. When pride meets pride, and neither one is willing to step aside, the body lies in state in Troy's greatest hall, and for the first time in 10 years, the city falls completely silent. Not the tense quiet of people hiding from danger, but the deep silence that comes when an entire civilization pauses to acknowledge that something irreplaceable has been lost forever. Hector's wounds have been cleaned and dressed by hands that shook while they worked. His armor has been polished until it gleams like captured starlight. He looks like he is sleeping, except for the hole in his throat where Achilles' spear found its mark, and the way his skin has taken on the waxy pallor that tells you no amount of wishful thinking will bring this man back to life. The morning begins before dawn and continues past sunset, wave after wave of grief rolling through the city like a tide that won't recede. His wife Andromache keens beside the body with a sound that makes stones weep, holding their baby son who is too young to understand why his father won't wake up, but old enough to sense that something fundamental has broken in the world around him. His mother Hecuba sits in silence that is somehow louder than screaming, staring at her eldest son's face and trying to remember when she last told him she loved him. His father Priam stands like a tree that has been struck by lightning, but hasn't fallen yet, receiving an endless line of citizens who come to pay their respects to the man who kept death outside their walls. For so long, they forgot it was always waiting there. The funeral preparations take 3 days, because Troy wants to do this right, wants to send their greatest hero off with honors that match what he meant to everyone who lived behind walls he defended with his life. They build a pyre that reaches toward the sky like a wooden mountain designed to carry souls to whatever place heroes go when their bodies stop working. They gather wood from every corner of the kingdom, each log a prayer that Hector's spirit will find peace in whatever realm waits beyond the one where people kill each other over women, and honor and pride that costs more than it is worth. Wine gets poured, incense burns. Priests chant words that sound like they're older than language itself. But the strangest thing about Hector's funeral is how it stops the war entirely. Greeks and Trojans observe an unofficial truce that no one discusses but everyone honors, as if both sides have simultaneously realized that some things matter more than whatever they've been fighting about for the last decade. Greek sentries watch the smoke rise from Troy's pyre and remember their own dead friends. Trojan guards look toward the beach where enemy ships sit like sleeping giants, and think about the mothers across the water who are also missing sons who went to war and never came home. The grief is bigger than sides, bigger than Greek or Trojan, bigger than right or wrong or any of the reasons people tell themselves when they need to justify why young men have to die in foreign fields, for causes that matter less than the lives they cost. For 3 days, while Hector burns and Troy mourns, the war pauses like even violence understands that some moments demand respect for what has been lost. The flames consume wood and flesh, and the illusion that heroes are somehow immune to the mathematics of mortality. When the fire finally dies down to embers and ash, everyone goes back to the business of killing each other. But something has changed, some recognition that what they're destroying is more precious than what they hope to gain. The war will continue, because wars have their own momentum once they start. But it will continue with the knowledge that honor is expensive, and glory is temporary, and some prices are too high to pay, no matter how badly you want what is being sold. Every morning for 11 days, Achilles harnesses his horses and drags Hector's body around Patroclus's tomb, like he is trying to wake his dead friend through repetition and creative applications of violence. The body should have disintegrated by now, should have been reduced to scattered bones and strips of flesh that even dogs wouldn't touch, but the gods are protecting it because even they have limits about how much desecration they're willing to watch in silence. Apollo keeps the flesh whole. Aphrodite drives away the carrion birds. The corpse remains stubbornly intact, which only makes Achilles angrier, because apparently even in death, Hector gets divine protection, while Patroclus lies cold and still and undefended in his grave. The Greeks watch their greatest hero's mourning ritual with the uncomfortable expressions of people who know they're witnessing something that has crossed the line from justice into madness, but are too afraid to say anything because Achilles has moved beyond normal human categories into territory where criticism might be answered with divine weapons and supernatural age. He doesn't speak to anyone during these daily exhibitions, doesn't acknowledge the stares or the whispered conversations that stop when he gets too close. He just harnesses the horses, ties the ropes, and drives around the tomb like he is trying to grind his grief against stone until one of them breaks. The dragging becomes its own kind of prayer, a ritual of violence that serves no purpose except giving Achilles something to do with hands that itch for Patroclus's resurrection and settle for Hector's continued humiliation. The horses know the route by heart now, 3 times around the tomb, always at the same pace, always with the same terrible purpose. Dust rises in clouds that hang in the air like incense burned for gods who specialize in revenge, and forget to mention that revenge never actually fixes anything. It just gives you something to do while you wait for time to make the pain bearable, assuming time ever does. The other Greeks start avoiding the area around Patroclus's tomb. Not because they're squeamish about death, but because watching Achilles drag Hector feels like watching someone you care about destroy himself in public while calling it justice. There is nothing heroic about it, nothing noble, nothing that will be remembered in songs except as a cautionary tale about what happens when grief transforms love into something that makes onlookers embarrassed to be human. Even the Myrmidons who follow Achilles with loyalty that borders on worship find excuses to be elsewhere when morning comes and the horses get harnessed for another round of pointless violence against a man who is already paid the ultimate price for his mistakes. But Achilles can't stop, because stopping would mean admitting that dragging Hector around a tomb doesn't bring Patroclus back, doesn't ease the pain, doesn't accomplish anything except proving that the greatest warrior who ever lived is just another broken man who doesn't know how to process loss without turning it into something that hurts everyone around him. The ritual continues, because the alternative is sitting still with his grief, and sitting still would mean feeling the full weight of what he has lost without the distraction of motion and violence and the illusion that action equals progress towards some kind of resolution. So he drags the body and counts the circles, and tells himself that justice has a number, that revenge has a quota, that somewhere beyond the next circuit around the tomb lies the peace that has been hiding from him. Since the moment he learned that lending your armor to someone you love is the same as signing their death warrant, in a war where gods place bets on human suffering, King Priam sits in his chamber staring at a ransom that could buy a dozen kingdoms, gold and silver and precious things accumulated over a lifetime of ruling the richest city in the world, and knows that all of it together isn't worth one dead son who will never again walk through these halls calling him father. But it is what he has to offer, and offering it means swallowing his pride and his rage and his perfectly justified desire to see Achilles burn in whatever hell awaits men who drag corpses around tombs like trophies. The old king loads a wagon with treasure that gleams even in torchlight, covers it with cloth that won't hide what is underneath, but might provide the illusion of dignity, and prepares to do something that no king should ever have to do: beg his son's killer for the right to bury his child. The journey to the Greek camp should take an hour. It takes all night because Priam isn't just traveling distance. He is traveling across a gulf between two kinds of grief that have been killing each other for 10 years without ever bothering to recognize that loss is loss regardless of which side of the walls you are crying behind. He drives the wagon himself because some humiliations are too personal to share, even with servants who've watched him rule for decades and know that kings are just men with better jewelry and worse responsibilities. Hermes guides him through Greek sentries who somehow don't see a Trojan king driving a treasure wagon through their camp, because even gods understand that some meetings require divine intervention to arrange. Achilles receives his visitor like a man who has been expecting this moment without knowing when it would arrive or what form it would take. He is sitting beside Patroclus's tomb, which has become his permanent address since he discovered that grief is a full-time job that doesn't leave room for sleeping indoors or eating regular meals, or any of the normal activities that constitute living. When he sees Priam approaching with a wagon full of ransom, he knows immediately what the old man wants and what it will cost both of them to have this conversation. Not gold, not silver. Something more expensive. The admission that enemies can love their dead just as fiercely as friends can, and that pain doesn't respect the political boundaries people draw to make war seem reasonable. The conversation that follows is the kind that gets remembered, not because it is dramatic, but because it is true in ways that make people uncomfortable with everything they thought they knew about heroes and villains and the clean divisions that war depends on to function. Priam kneels before the man who killed his son, and the kneeling breaks something in Achilles. that 10 days of dragging bodies couldn't touch. The old king speaks about loss and love, and the specific weight of burying children who were supposed to bury you. He talks about Hector as a son, not as Troy's champion, as a father who would never again lift his baby boy, or teach him how to hold a spear, or explain why some things are worth dying for, even when they don't feel worth dying for. Achilles listens and hears his own father's voice in an enemy's words, his own grief reflected in an old man's tears, his own love for Patroclus echoed in a stranger's love for Hector. They sit together beside the tomb and cry, not because crying fixes anything, but because some moments require tears, the way rivers require rain. When it is over, when the gold has been counted and the body prepared for transport, they both know that nothing has changed about the war except their understanding of why it hurts so much to win or lose when the victory costs you everything you thought you were fighting to protect. Priam drives back to Troy with his son's body, and Achilles returns to his tent to discover that revenge, even when it is complete, leaves you empty in places you didn't know existed until you filled them with someone else's pain. The dust cloud appears on the eastern horizon 3 days after Hector's funeral, and at first everyone assumes it is another ally coming to help Troy in its darkest hour, because allies have been trickling in for 10 years with promises of aid that usually amount to a few hundred men and a lot of speeches about honor. But this dust cloud moves differently, faster, with the kind of purpose that suggests whoever's raising it isn't coming to negotiate or offer conditional support or any of the other diplomatic dances that usually precede actual help. These riders are coming to fight, and they're coming now, and when they finally resolve into individual figures against the sky, every man on both sides of the war stops what he is doing to stare at something he has never seen before, and isn't sure he is seeing correctly now. Penthesilea leads her warriors like a storm front made of bronze and horsehair, beautiful in the way that lightning is beautiful when it is about to kill you. She is queen of the Amazons, which means she has spent her entire life learning how to turn violence into art, and art into the kind of warfare that makes professional soldiers question their career choices. Her armor fits like it grew from her skin. Her spear moves like it is an extension of her arm. When she rides, horse and rider become one creature with 4 legs and 2 minds that agree on everything that matters, which is mainly killing enemies and looking magnificent while doing it. The Amazons who follow her are cut from the same cloth. Women who've rejected everything their world tells them about proper feminine behavior and replaced it with skills that make grown men nervous in ways they can't quite articulate. They fight like they have something to prove, which they do, because every battle is a referendum on whether women belong on fields where men traditionally go to die for causes that matter less than the lives they cost. They're not fighting for Troy, exactly. They're fighting for the chance to show that courage doesn't require male anatomy, and strength doesn't require masculine pride, and dying gloriously is an equal opportunity employment situation that doesn't discriminate based on what is between your legs. The Trojans welcome them with the enthusiasm of people who've just realized that help has arrived in the most unexpected possible form. Queens who can fight warriors who happen to be women. Allies who bring something Troy has been missing for 10 years, which is the element of surprise wrapped in capabilities that no one on either side is quite prepared to handle. The Greeks watch the Amazon arrival with expressions that mix confusion, concern, and the kind of professional interest that soldiers develop when they realize they're about to face an enemy they've never trained to fight and don't fully understand. Penthesilea requests an audience with King Priam, not because she needs permission to start killing Greeks, but because courtesy matters even when you are about to turn a battlefield into a demonstration of why underestimating women is a mistake that some men only get to make once. She offers Troy her spear, her warriors, and her promise that Hector's death will be avenged by people who understand that honor isn't gender-specific and revenge isn't a masculine monopoly. Priam accepts with tears in his eyes, because sometimes hope arrives wearing armor you didn't expect and carrying weapons you didn't know existed, but definitely need right now, when the walls feel smaller and the enemy feels stronger, and the future feels like something that is happening to other people in better stories with happier endings. Penthesilea rides out the next morning, like war itself has decided to take female form and settle some long-standing accounts with men who think fighting is their exclusive specialty. The battle that follows isn't like the grinding siege warfare that has dominated this conflict for a decade. This is something faster, sharper, more personal. Amazons fight like they're dancing to music only they can hear, weaving between enemy spears with movements that turn combat into performance art, where the performance happens to involve a lot of blood and the art happens to be applied with bronze weapons that find gaps in armor with surgical precision. The Greeks have never fought women before, at least not women who know what they're doing with weapons and horses, and the kind of tactical thinking that comes from a lifetime of proving you belong in places where people keep telling you you don't. It shows. Their formations, designed to handle male warriors who fight in predictable patterns, struggle to adapt to enemies who move differently, think differently, attack from angles that male military doctrine never considered, because male military doctrine was written by men who assumed they'd only ever fight other men. Spears designed to stop charging cavalry misriders who flow around them like water around stones. Shields positioned to block downward strikes from horseback fail to stop attacks that come from directions that shouldn't be possible, but apparently are. Penthesilea cuts through Greek ranks like a sword through silk, her spear finding targets with the inevitability of lightning, seeking the highest point in an open field. She is beautiful and terrible in equal measure, the kind of warrior who makes poets struggle to find words that capture what it looks like when someone fights with their entire being instead of just their body. Men fall away from her, not just because she is dangerous, but because she is something they've never encountered before. Something that challenges every assumption they've made about gender and war, and who gets to be dangerous in a world that usually reserves danger for people who happen to be born male. But even Amazon queens are mortal, and mortality has a way of asserting itself when you are fighting the greatest warrior who ever lived in front of walls that have been soaked in 10 years of other people's blood. Achilles watches her approach with the expression of someone who has found a puzzle he actually wants to solve, not because he enjoys killing women, but because he enjoys fighting people who might actually provide something resembling a challenge. The duel that follows is brief and brilliant, and ends the way all duels end when one participant is protected by divine armor, and the other is protected by nothing except skill and courage, and the kind of defiant pride that makes you charge at invincible enemies. Because someone has to. Achilles' spear finds the gap between her breastplate and her helmet, and Penthesilea falls from her horse like a star going out. Beautiful even in death, because beauty doesn't care about timing or fairness or any of the other considerations that make dying inconvenient for people who had plans that didn't include bleeding to death in foreign fields. When Achilles removes her helmet and sees her face, something shifts in his expression. Some recognition that he has just killed something precious and irreplaceable, and probably necessary in a world that has too few people who understand that courage is courage regardless of what shape it comes in. The Amazons retreat not because they're cowards, but because their queen is dead, and queens are not replaceable, even by women who know how to fight like forces of nature disguised as human beings. The ships that arrive from the south carry warriors whose skin gleams like polished bronze under Mediterranean sun, and when they disembark on Troy's beaches, even the Trojans stop to stare, because Memnon and his Ethiopians look like gods who've decided to vacation in mortal form and brought their divine weapons with them just in case the accommodations prove disappointing. Memnon himself moves with the fluid grace of someone who has never doubted his place in the world, or his ability to reshape that world according to his preferences. He is Achilles' age, Achilles' skill level, and according to some rumors, Achilles' divine parentage, which means Troy suddenly has an ally who might actually be able to stand toe-to-toe with the Greeks' greatest weapon, and live long enough to tell about it. The Ethiopians fight like they learned warfare from watching storms move across open water, flowing and shifting and striking with the kind of coordinated violence that suggests they've been fighting together so long they can read each other's minds and predict each other's movements and arrange themselves into formations that exist only for as long as they need to exist, before dissolving into new configurations that serve new purposes. Their weapons catch light differently than Greek bronze. Their armor moves differently than Trojan gear, and when they charge, the sound they make is like nothing anyone on either side has heard before, which is both inspiring if they're on your side, and terrifying if they're not. Memnon requests single combat with Achilles, not because he is suicidal, but because he is the son of Eos, goddess of the dawn, and divine children don't back down from challenges even when the challenges involve fighting people who are protected by armor forged by gods who specialize in making their favorites impossible to kill. The duel that everyone has been anticipating since the Ethiopians arrived finally happens on a morning when the sun seems reluctant to rise, as if even celestial bodies understand that some fights are too important to illuminate carelessly. Two heroes, equally matched, equally blessed, equally doomed by the mathematics of narrative necessity that demands one of them die to advance the plot toward its inevitable conclusion. The fight lasts longer than anyone expected, and ends sooner than anyone wanted, with movements too fast for mortal eyes to follow and exchanges too complex for mortal minds to analyze, and a final strike that settles the question of divine favor in ways that make it clear the gods are still playing favorites, but their favorites aren't always the ones you'd expect. Memnon falls like a prince going to sleep, graceful even in defeat. And when he dies, something goes out of the war that can't be replaced by more allies, or better weapons, or any of the other resources that kings use to postpone the inevitable recognition that some problems can't be solved by throwing more violence at them. Achilles stands over another dead hero, and feels the weight of prophecy settling on his shoulders like a cloak made of lead and regret. Every man he kills brings him closer to his own death, and he knows it, has always known it. But knowing doesn't make the killing any easier or the dying any less inevitable. Memnon was supposed to be his equal, someone who might actually pose a threat, someone who might provide the kind of challenge that makes victory feel earned instead of predetermined. Instead, he is just another body on a field that is already too full of bodies. Another name for poets to add to lists that grow longer with each passing season, while the war grinds on toward an ending that will satisfy no one and cost everyone more than they thought they had to lose. Achilles stands at the Scaean gate, hammering on bronze with his fists, like he is trying to knock down Troy through sheer force of will, when Paris appears on the walls above with a bow that gleams like captured starlight and an arrow that seems to hum with divine purpose. It is almost anticlimactic, really. 10 years of war, countless duels with heroes whose names will echo through eternity, divine armor that is turned aside every weapon forged by mortal hands. And in the end it comes down to a pretty boy with good aim and a god who is tired of watching his favorite city get terrorized. The arrow doesn't look like much, just bronze and wood and feathers arranged in the traditional configuration that has been killing people since someone first figured out how to make pointy sticks fly farther than throwing arms could manage. But Apollo guides it, and the arrow finds the one spot on Achilles' body that his mother forgot to dip in the river Styx. The heel seems like such a small thing to kill the greatest warrior who ever lived. But small things have been toppling empires since the first king discovered that crowns don't protect from arrows any better than anyone else's hat does. The armor sits in Agamemnon's tent, like a monument to divine craftsmanship and human stupidity. Each piece still gleaming with the kind of light that suggests it was made by someone who understands that some equipment transcends normal categories. Ajax stands before it, like a man who has been waiting his entire life for this moment, which he probably has, because second place is difficult when first place involves being Achilles. Odysseus wants the armor too, but for different reasons that he is happy to explain in speeches that demonstrate exactly why clever people sometimes make everyone else want to punch them. The contest that follows is political theatre that makes everyone involved look petty, while important decisions get made based on who gives the best speech rather than who is actually qualified to inherit weapons that could probably level cities. Odysseus wins because he is better with words than Ajax is, which proves that democracy works right up until it doesn't. Ajax takes the loss exactly as well as you'd expect from someone who has spent his entire adult life coming in second place to people who get divine assistance. He doesn't rage or threaten or storm out like a child whose toy has been given to someone else. He just stands there for a moment, looking at armor that should have been his, and you can see something break behind his eyes that can't be fixed with speeches about fairness. Madness comes gradually, then all at once, creeping into his thoughts like poison, until everything tastes bitter, and nothing makes sense except the growing certainty that he has been betrayed by people he trusted. The gods send him a delusion that turns sheep into enemies, and Ajax spends the night slaughtering livestock, while thinking he is executing the men who stole his honor. When dawn comes and the madness lifts, he finds himself standing in a field full of dead animals, covered in blood that isn't human. Ajax falls on his sword like a man who has finally found a problem he can solve with violence. The idea comes to Odysseus like inspiration wearing work clothes, practical and unglamorous, but potentially effective in ways that heroic gestures have proven not to be. If Troy's walls can't be breached, and Troy's gates can't be forced, then maybe the solution involves not fighting Troy at all. Maybe it involves making Troy invite destruction inside on its own terms, using its own confidence against itself. The horse begins as an idea that sounds ridiculous, until you think about it long enough to realize that ridiculous ideas sometimes work precisely because they're too ridiculous for reasonable people to take seriously. Build something that looks like a gift but functions like a trap, something large enough to hide soldiers, but innocent enough to seem harmless. The Greeks are gone, not tactically repositioned or temporarily withdrawn, but actually completely definitively gone. Their ships disappeared beyond the horizon, like they never existed except in nightmares that lasted 10 years. The Trojans pour out of their gates like water from a broken dam, 10 years of siege mentality suddenly released. The horse itself is beautiful in ways that make people stop and stare, every line flowing into the next with mathematical precision. The debate about what to do with it splits Troy's leadership like an axe splits seasoned timber. Laocoon argues against bringing the horse inside with the kind of passion that suggests he has seen this story before and knows how it ends. But prophecy has a way of being ignored by people who prefer optimism to accuracy. The horse rolls through Troy's gates like destiny wearing wheels. The celebration lasts until the wine runs out, and even the most dedicated revelers admit that 10 years of pent-up joy has limits. Troy sleeps the sleep of the victorious, deep and dreamless, and completely unguarded, because who needs guards when your enemies have sailed away and left behind only a wooden horse that is obviously harmless? Inside the horse, Greek soldiers sit in darkness, so complete it has weight, breathing air that tastes like wood shavings and their own fear. The trapdoor opens like the mouth of night itself, and soldiers spill out into Troy's sleeping streets with the fluid motion of men who've rehearsed this moment until it became muscle memory and prayer combined. Fire spreads through Troy like liquid hatred, consuming palaces and hovels with equal enthusiasm, because flame doesn't discriminate when everything is made of wood and accumulated dreams. The slaughter is systematic and thorough, conducted by men who've spent 10 years thinking about this moment. King Priam dies at his own altar, cut down while begging gods who've stopped listening. Helen gets rescued by Menelaus, who finds her hiding in a temple, and remembers, despite everything, that he still loves her in ways that don't make sense, but don't have to. The ships that leave Troy's smoking ruins carry men who've been changed by 10 years of war in ways that make home feel like a foreign country. Agamemnon sails home with confidence that turns out to be exactly the wrong kind to bring to a wife who has spent 10 years planning revenge. Menelaus gets his wife back, but Helen comes with 10 years of distance and the kind of silence that builds between people who've hurt each other in ways that can't be fixed. Most of the others don't make it home at all, which is how these stories usually end when you look past the famous names and consider what happens to ordinary soldiers who survive extraordinary wars, only to discover that survival is just the first challenge. The war ends the way wars always end, not with satisfaction or resolution, but with exhaustion, and the growing realization that victory looks suspiciously like defeat when you count the cost in lives that can't be restored and cities that can't be rebuilt. Troy is gone. The heroes are dead or damaged or changed beyond recognition, and somewhere in the ruins of everything they thought they were fighting for, the wind blows through empty palaces and reminds no one in particular that this is how all empires end, with silence and ashes and the kind of emptiness that makes you wonder why anyone thought any of this was worth doing in the first place. So there you have it, the Trojan War. 10 years of violence that started with a golden apple and ended with golden cities burning. Heroes who thought they were immortal until arrows found their heels. Kings who won everything except the ability to live with what they'd won. Wars that consume the very things they're fought to protect. It is the oldest story we know, and we keep telling it because we keep living it over and over in different costumes, but with the same broken hearts. Sweet dreams. Try not to start any wars tomorrow.